So, there I was, bathed in the crimson glow of flickering sirens, watching Karen's McMansion turn into a glorified bonfire. It was like a scene from a bad action movie, only instead of a stoic hero, you had me, Alex, your average tech nerd turned accidental arson enthusiast. Did I push things too far? Maybe. But hey, nobody ever accused karma of being subtle, right? Let me rewind a bit. Before the flames, before the screaming, before the sheer, unadulterated joy of watching a symbol of suburban tyranny crumble into a pile of smoking rubble. Okay, maybe that last part needs some explaining. Life was mundane. I, Alex, a purveyor of all things digital and a connoisseur of comfortable silence, had just moved into Pleasantville Estates. The name itself should have been a red flag, a warning siren blaring. Abandon all hope, ye who enter, especially if you have a penchant for painting your front door a vibrant shade of electric blue. See, I'm a simple guy. I work from home, coding things that probably control your thermostat or decide what cat videos you see on the internet. My hobbies include optimizing my standing desk setup and perfecting the art of brewing the perfect cup of pour-over coffee. I'm not exactly a rebel. I'm more of a rebel against bad Wi-Fi kind of guy. But Pleasantville Estates was a different beast altogether. Picture this. Rows upon rows of identical beige houses, each with a perfectly manicured lawn, a pristine white picket fence, and a soul-crushing sense of conformity. It was like living in a Stepford Wives reboot, only with more SUVs and less free will. Enter Karen Thompson, our neighborhood's very own queen bee, empress of enforcement, and generalissimo of garden gnomes. Karen was the president of the HOA, Homeowners Association, a position she held with the iron grip of a toddler clutching a lollipop. Now, when I say Karen, I'm not just using it as a generic insult. No, this was the Karen, the prototype, the one they based the memes on. Imagine a woman whose natural habitat is a PDA meeting, whose preferred mode of communication is passive-aggressive sticky notes, and whose superpower is finding fault in everything. Picture a linebacker in floral print, a force of nature fueled by entitlement and lukewarm Chardonnay. And yes, she had the signature helmet of bleached blonde hair that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." From the moment I moved in, I was on Karen's radar. My crime? Existing. But more specifically, my crime was daring to be different. My electric blue door was an eyesore. My slightly overgrown lawn was a breeding ground for vermin. Never mind that I saw more squirrels in her meticulously maintained garden. And my collection of quirky garden gnomes, each strategically placed for maximum ironic effect, was, according to Karen, a blatant disregard for community standards. The emails started subtly, a friendly reminder that house colors must adhere to the approved palette. Then came the letters, printed on crisp, intimidating letterhead. Notice of violation, excessive lawn height, fine, $50. And finally, the piece de resistance, the personal visits. I'd be in the middle of debugging some gnarly piece of code, headphones on, blissfully unaware of the impending doom, when I'd hear the dreaded knock. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the kind of knock that suggested the apocalypse was at your doorstep, demanding to see your manager. I'd open the door to find Karen, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and radiating a palpable aura of disapproval. "Mr. Last Name," she'd begin, her voice dripping with condescension. "We need to talk about your yard." It wasn't just the aesthetic offenses either. Karen seemed determined to find any excuse to find me, to control me, to make my life a living hell. She complained about the excessive noise from my apartment. I listened to classical music at a reasonable volume. The unsightly recycling bins, they were tucked away behind my garage. And even the suspicious amount of packages delivered to my door. Amazon Prime is a gift and a curse, Karen. First, I tried to reason with her. I politely explained that the blue door brought me joy, that the slightly overgrown lawn was actually a haven for pollinators, and that my garden gnomes were works of art. Damn it. But Karen wasn't interested in reason. She was interested in power. So, I did what any self-respecting tech nerd would do. I researched. I dove headfirst into the murky depths of the HOA bylaws, a document so dense and convoluted it made quantum physics look like a children's book. And what did I find? Gold? Jerry, gold. It turned out Karen was bending the rules, interpreting them in her own twisted way, and generally abusing her power as president. She was fining people for infractions that didn't exist, using HOA funds for her personal landscaping projects, and generally running Pleasantville estates like her own personal fiefdom. Armed with this knowledge, I tried to report her to the other members of the HOA board, but they were all too afraid of her, too intimidated by her sheer force of will. They were like a flock of sheep, bleating nervously as Karen led them to the slaughterhouse of conformity. That's when things started getting interesting. That's when the revenge story part of our tale truly began. It wasn't enough to simply expose Karen's corruption. I wanted to make her feel the way she made me feel. Helpless, frustrated, and utterly powerless. And that, my friends, is when I discovered that Karen had a weakness. A secret, dark, and electricity-guzzling weakness. She was obsessed with keeping her lawn perfectly green, even during the worst droughts. And to achieve this horticultural miracle, she had installed a complex, underground irrigation system that sucked up more water and electricity than a small country. One night, as I was working late, fueled by caffeine and righteous indignation, I noticed something odd. The lights in my apartment flickered momentarily, then went back to normal. A coincidence? Maybe, but something felt off. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was definitely happening. Someone was messing with my electricity. So, I did what any self-respecting, slightly paranoid tech nerd would do. I installed security cameras. Not just any security cameras, mind you. These were state-of-the-art, night vision, motion-activated, facial recognition-capable bad boys. I wanted to catch whoever was messing with my power red-handed. And that's exactly what I did. One particularly dark and stormy night, the cameras caught it all. There she was, waddling through my backyard in her floral pajamas and fuzzy slippers, a pair of wire cutters clutched in her hand like a weapon. It was Karen. She crept up to the electrical box on the side of my house, carefully opened it, and then, with a malevolent grin on her face, she snipped the wires. My electricity went out, plunging my apartment into darkness. But Karen didn't stop there. Oh no. She stood there for a moment, basking in the darkness, reveling in her petty act of sabotage. And then, she did something truly Karen-esque. She looked directly at the camera, gave a smug little wave, and then sauntered back to her house, presumably to enjoy a cup of chamomile tea and congratulate herself on a job well done. The obvious thing to do would have been to call the cops. Show them the video, press charges, watch Karen get dragged away in handcuffs, and then bask in the sweet, sweet glow of justice. But where's the fun in that? Where's the artistry? Where's the chance to really, truly humiliate the woman who dared to mess with my Wi-Fi? Okay, it was more than just the Wi-Fi, but let's be honest, that's where the real pain was. First things first, I needed to document everything. I downloaded the video footage, backed it up on multiple hard drives. You can never be too careful when dealing with a woman who's capable of wielding wire cutters with the precision of a brain surgeon. And then wrote a detailed account of Karen's reign of terror. It was like crafting a legal thriller, only with more garden gnomes and passive-aggressive sticky notes. Next, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA. I presented my evidence calmly and professionally to the other members of the board. And what did they do? They hemmed and hawed, mumbled excuses, and generally acted like they were being asked to defuse a bomb. Well, Mr. Last Name, said Bob, the HOA treasurer, a man whose life ambition was to balance the budget and avoid conflict at all costs. We appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but, Karen has been a valuable member of this community for many years. And, well, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? She literally cut my power. It was like saying the Titanic sinking was just a minor navigational error. I tried to reason with them, to explain the severity of the situation, but they were too far gone. They were trapped in Karen's web of influence, paralyzed by her sheer force of personality. It was like trying to convince a cult member that their leader was a fraud. Dejected but not defeated, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew I couldn't fight Karen head-on. She was too entrenched, too powerful, too Karen. I needed to be smarter, more cunning, more devious. I needed to fight her with her own weapons: bureaucracy, passive aggression, and a healthy dose of suburban sabotage. My first act of rebellion was to exploit a loophole in the HOA bylaws. It turned out that there was a clause stating that any homeowner could request a formal review of any existing HOA policy. So, I requested a review of the policy regarding excessive lawn height. I argued, with painstaking detail and copious amounts of botanical research, that the current policy was discriminatory against native plant species, detrimental to local ecosystems, and generally a violation of my right to express my individuality through slightly longer grass. The HOA board was forced to convene a special meeting to discuss my request. Karen, of course, was furious. She sat at the head of the table, glaring at me with the intensity of 1,000 suns. But she couldn't do anything. I was playing by the rules, using her own system against her. The meeting dragged on for hours, with endless debate and nitpicking over the definition of excessive. In the end, the board voted to table the issue for further consideration, which was basically a fancy way of saying they were going to ignore it and hope I went away. But I wasn't going away. Oh no, I was just getting started. My next move was to target Karen's beloved irrigation system. I knew that she was obsessed with keeping her lawn perfectly green, no matter the cost. And I knew that her irrigation system was the key to her horticultural tyranny. So, I did a little research, thanks Google, and discovered that her irrigation system was connected to a smart home system that she controlled through her phone. And, being the tech-savvy individual that I am, I figured out a way to, let's just say, influence her system. I won't go into the technical details because, frankly, they're boring and probably illegal. But suffice it to say that I was able to remotely control her irrigation system. I could turn it on and off, adjust the water pressure, and even program it to spray her lawn with a delightful mixture of fertilizer and, well, let's just call it organic matter. At first, I was subtle. I'd turn the system on for a few minutes in the middle of the night, just enough to give her lawn a slightly soggy appearance. Then, I'd crank up the water pressure, causing her sprinklers to spray water all over her house and car. Karen, of course, was livid. She stormed over to my house, ranting and raving about my malicious behavior and threatening to call the police. But I just smiled sweetly and told her that I had no idea what she was talking about. Perhaps, I suggested, you should have your irrigation system checked by a professional. It sounds like there might be a malfunction. The best part was that she couldn't prove anything. I was careful to cover my tracks, to make sure that there was no evidence linking me to the irrigation system shenanigans. It was like a game of cat and mouse, only the cat was a tech-savvy nerd and the mouse was a suburban tyrant. But then, things took a turn for the electrifying. One afternoon, as I was working at my computer, I heard a loud scream coming from Karen's backyard. I rushed to the window and saw her standing near her irrigation system, clutching her arm and yelling obscenities. Apparently, while she was trying to fix a leaky sprinkler head, she had accidentally touched a live wire. She hadn't been seriously hurt, just a minor shock. But it was enough to send her into a full-blown meltdown. She called the police, claiming that I had deliberately sabotaged her irrigation system and tried to electrocute her. The police, of course, investigated, but they found no evidence of foul play. "It appears to be an accident, ma'am," said the officer, trying to suppress a smirk. "Perhaps you should be more careful when working with electricity." Karen, defeated and humiliated, stormed back to her house, muttering about lawsuits and revenge. And that's when I knew I had crossed a line. I had gone from petty sabotage to potentially endangering someone's life. It was a sobering moment. But then I remembered all the times Karen had made my life miserable, all the fines, the emails, the condescending remarks. And I thought, well, she kind of had it coming. So, Karen's electrocution, accidental or otherwise, definitely ratcheted things up a notch. I wasn't proud of it, per se, but I wasn't exactly unproud either. Let's just say it added a certain je ne sais quoi to our already complicated relationship. It was like we were starring in our own twisted version of War of the Roses, only with more lawn care equipment and less Kathleen Turner. The thing about Karen is, she was predictable. Like a grumpy, blonde, entitlement-fueled weather system, you could always count on her to react in a certain way. And her reaction to the electrocution incident was exactly what I expected. A full-blown, nuclear-level meltdown. She became even more obsessed with me, even more determined to make my life a living hell. She started following me around the neighborhood, taking pictures of me, and generally acting like a deranged paparazzi. She even tried to get me fired from my job, claiming that I was a dangerous sociopath who posed a threat to the entire community. Fortunately, my boss has a sense of humor and a healthy appreciation for schadenfreude, so her efforts were unsuccessful. But it was clear that things were escalating. I needed to act, and I needed to act fast. I decided to go for the jugular. I was going to take down Karen's HOA empire, brick by bureaucratic brick. And to do that, I needed to strike at the heart of her power, her control over information. You see, Karen wasn't just the president of the HOA. She was also the editor of the neighborhood newsletter, the Pleasantville Press. And, as you might imagine, the Pleasantville Press was less of a source of objective news and more of a propaganda organ for Karen's twisted worldview. It was filled with articles praising her leadership, promoting her pet projects, and generally painting a rosy picture of life in Pleasantville Estates, as long as you followed her rules, of course. It was like living in a North Korean suburb, only with more HOA meetings and less mandatory kimchi. So I decided to create my own news source. I launched a website called The Pleasantville Truth, a satirical news outlet dedicated to exposing Karen's corruption and highlighting the absurdities of suburban life. I wrote articles about her misuse of HOA funds, her bizarre obsession with lawn care, and her general air of self-importance. I photoshopped pictures of her riding a unicorn through the neighborhood, dressed in a full suit of armor. I even created a fake interview with her, in which she confessed to being a secret agent for the Illuminati, tasked with controlling the world through meticulously manicured lawns. The Pleasantville Truth was an instant hit. People loved it. They shared it on social media, forwarded it to their friends, and even printed out copies and posted them on their neighbors' doors. It was like a breath of fresh, satirical air in the stale, suffocating atmosphere of Pleasantville Estates. Karen, of course, was apoplectic. She called me a liar, a troublemaker, and a purveyor of fake news. She demanded that I take down the website immediately, threatening to sue me for defamation. But I just laughed and told her that everything on the website was true, or at least true in spirit. And besides, I added, satire is protected by the First Amendment. Emboldened by the success of the Pleasantville Truth, I decided to take things a step further. I created a fake Facebook page for the HOA, complete with a profile picture of a garden gnome wearing a tiny MAGA hat. On this fake page, I posted increasingly outrageous announcements, such as a ban on all outdoor decorations, except for American flags, of course, a mandatory neighborhood talent show featuring only patriotic songs, and a proposal to build a giant statue of Karen in the center of the town square. People went wild. They argued in the comments, shared the posts with their friends, and generally descended into a state of online chaos. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, only with more political commentary and less actual trains. Karen, predictably, lost her mind. She called Facebook, demanding that they take down the fake page. But Facebook, in its infinite wisdom, refused, claiming that the page was a parody and therefore protected by free speech. And that's when I knew I had her. I had cracked her armor, exposed her to ridicule, and turned her own community against her. She was no longer the all-powerful ruler of Pleasantville Estates. She was a laughingstock, but I wasn't done yet. I had one more trick up my sleeve, a final act of suburban sabotage that would cement my victory and send Karen spiraling into a vortex of despair. I decided to run for president of the HOA myself. The election was a circus. Karen, of course, ran a smear campaign against me, accusing me of everything from being a communist to having an unhealthy obsession with garden gnomes. But I fought back with wit, humor, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. I promised to lower HOA fees, eliminate unnecessary regulations, and generally make Pleasantville Estates a more fun and welcoming place to live. And, to my surprise, I won. I defeated Karen in a landslide victory, riding a wave of anti-establishment sentiment and a general desire for change. It was like Bernie Sanders had taken over a gated community. Taking over the HOA was anticlimactic, to be honest. Most of the meetings were filled with discussions about tree trimming, mailbox regulations, and the eternal debate over whether or not holiday decorations should be allowed before Thanksgiving. It was less House of Cards and more House of Mild Annoyances. But behind the scenes, I was subtly dismantling Karen's legacy. I repealed her most ridiculous regulations, lowered HOA fees slightly, and even approved a community garden project where people could grow their own vegetables. Horror of horrors. I was slowly but surely turning Pleasantville Estates into a slightly less oppressive and slightly more enjoyable place to live. Of course, Karen wasn't happy about it. She was like a disgruntled queen bee, stripped of her crown and forced to watch as her hive crumbled around her. She became increasingly isolated, spending her days wandering around the neighborhood, muttering about conspiracies and plotting her revenge. She even started leaving anonymous notes on my doorstep, filled with cryptic threats and bizarre accusations. One note accused me of being a lizard person in disguise, sent to destroy Pleasantville Estates from within. Another claimed that I was secretly in league with the squirrels, plotting to overthrow humanity and establish a squirrelocracy. It was clear that she was losing it. And honestly, I felt a little bad for her. A little. But then I remembered all the times she had made my life miserable, all the fines, the emails, the electrocution attempt. And the sympathy faded faster than a tan in January. I knew that she was planning something. I could feel it in my bones. She was like a pressure cooker, slowly building up steam, waiting for the right moment to explode. And then one night it happened. I was working late, debugging some particularly nasty piece of code, when I heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like snipping. I cautiously peeked out the window and saw Karen, lurking in the shadows, holding a pair of wire cutters. Not again, I thought. But this time, she wasn't heading for my electrical box. She was heading for the electrical box that controlled her irrigation system. I watched in disbelief as she opened the box and started fiddling with the wires. What was she doing? Was she trying to fix it? Sabotage it? Electrocute herself again? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, a loud bang, and then darkness. The power went out in my apartment, and in the entire neighborhood. Karen had blown a fuse, a big one. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and cautiously ventured outside. The entire street was pitch black, except for the flickering light of a few candles in the windows. And then I saw it. Smoke. It was coming from Karen's house. Thick, black smoke, billowing from the windows and doors. Fire. Her house was on fire. I rushed towards her house, frantically dialing 911. As I got closer, I could see Karen standing on her front lawn, staring at her burning house with a look of stunned disbelief. "Karen!" I shouted. "Are you okay? Is anyone else inside?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, transfixed, watching as her McMansion went up in flames. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the entire house in a raging inferno. The flames licked at the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the neighborhood. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the fire trucks raced towards us. As I stood there, watching Karen's house burn, I felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, disbelief, and, if I'm being honest, a tiny bit of satisfaction. It was like something out of a movie, karmic reckoning, a suburban apocalypse. And I was right there in the middle of it, watching as Karen's world went up in flames. The fire trucks arrived, and the firefighters quickly sprang into action, battling the blaze with hoses and axes. But it was too late. The house was already a lost cause. I watched as they dragged Karen away, kicking and screaming, trying to get back to her burning house. She was covered in soot, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were wild with panic. As they put her in the ambulance, she looked at me, her eyes filled with hate. "This is all your fault," she screamed. "You did this to me." I just shrugged and shook my head. "I didn't do anything, Karen," I said. "You did this to yourself." And as the ambulance sped away, leaving behind a smoldering ruin, I realized that it was true. Karen had brought this on herself. Her obsession with control, her vindictiveness, her general lack of self-awareness. It had all led to this. So Karen's house was gone, reduced to a smoking pile of debris, a testament to the destructive power of unchecked entitlement and faulty wiring. And Karen? Well, Karen was complicated. It's hard to gloat when someone's lost everything, even if that someone is a tyrannical HOA president with a penchant for electrocution. The aftermath was a whirlwind of police investigations, insurance adjusters, and gawking neighbors. Pleasantville Estates was anything but pleasant. It was a disaster zone, a spectacle of suburban ruin. The police questioned me extensively, of course. They wanted to know if I had anything to do with the fire. I told them the truth, mostly. I admitted to creating the Pleasantville Truth and running the fake HOA Facebook page, but I denied any involvement in the actual fire. And, to my surprise, they believed me. Or, at least, they didn't have enough evidence to charge me with anything. They chalked it up to an accident, a tragic confluence of faulty wiring and Karen's own ineptitude. Karen, however, was convinced that I was responsible. She filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of arson, defamation, and general mayhem. It was a long shot, to say the least, but she was determined to make me pay for what she perceived as my crimes. The lawsuit dragged on for months, filling my life with depositions, court hearings, and endless legal paperwork. It was a stressful and exhausting experience, and I started to regret my little revenge plot. Was it really worth all this trouble? But then, something unexpected happened. One day, I received a letter from Karen's lawyer. It was a settlement offer. Karen was willing to drop the lawsuit if I agreed to pay her a sum of money and issue a public apology. I was tempted to refuse. I was innocent, damn it. Why should I have to pay her anything? But then I thought about it. The lawsuit was draining me financially and emotionally. It was keeping me from my work, my friends, and my life. And honestly, I was tired of fighting. So I agreed to the settlement. I paid her the money, a relatively small amount, thankfully. And I issued a public apology, expressing my regret for any distress I may have caused her. Felt weird, like admitting defeat. But it also felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. With the lawsuit behind me, I decided to focus on rebuilding Pleasantville Estates. I organized community cleanup days, helped the displaced families find temporary housing, and even started a fundraising campaign to rebuild Karen's house. Okay, I didn't personally donate to the Karen Rebuild Fund, but I did encourage others to do so. And then, one day, I received a visit from Karen herself. She looked different, humbled, sad. She was living in a small apartment on the other side of town, struggling to make ends meet. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for helping the community. For everything." I was stunned. Was this the same Karen who had terrorized me for months? The same Karen who had tried to electrocute me? "You're welcome," I said, awkwardly. We stood there in silence for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I was wrong," she finally said, "about everything. I was so focused on control, on power, that I lost sight of what really mattered. I hurt a lot of people, and for that, I'm truly sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a flicker of genuine remorse in her eyes. And, in that moment, I realized that she wasn't just a caricature, a meme, a Karen. She was a person with her own flaws, her own insecurities, and her own regrets. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. We talked for a while about the fire, about the lawsuit, about the future. She told me about her plans to move away, to start a new life somewhere else. "I need a fresh start," she said, "a chance to reinvent myself." As she was leaving, she turned to me and smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was genuine. "Thank you, Alex," she said, "for everything." And then she was gone. With Karen gone, Pleasantville Estates slowly began to heal. The community came together, supporting each other, rebuilding what had been lost. I continued to serve as president of the HOA, trying to make the neighborhood a better place for everyone. I learned to listen to other people's opinions, to compromise, and to be a little less sarcastic. I even started to appreciate the beauty of a well-manicured lawn a little bit. Looking back, I realized that my little revenge plot had been a mistake. It had spiraled out of control, causing more harm than good. I had let my anger and frustration get the better of me, and I had almost destroyed my own life in the process. But I had also learned a valuable lesson: that revenge is never the answer, that forgiveness is always possible, and that even the most tyrannical HOA president can be redeemed. So, was it all worth it? Probably not. But did I learn something from it? Absolutely. And in the end, maybe that's all that matters. Besides, I still have my quirky garden gnomes. And that's gotta count for something, right? The moral of the story: folks, don't mess with a tech nerd. And maybe, just maybe, try to be a little nicer to your HOA president. You never know what they might be going through, or what kind of revenge they might be plotting. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is forgiveness. And sometimes it's just a well-placed garden gnome.